Hi friends. Last week, Congress, both the Senate and the House, voted to pass the American Inflation Reduction Act. Anytime Congress names a bill something, you should assume that it probably does the exact opposite. And true to form, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont even stated that in fact, the bill does very little for inflation. It in fact does almost nothing for inflation, yet he still voted for it, by the way. So what is in the American Inflation Reduction Act? Well, it's 755 pages, and I am confident that nobody in Congress has read it in its entirety. But let me sum up, I think, three very important points from the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. And this is in no specific order. Number one is the minimum tax on book income for corporations. All that means is corporations that make a minimum amount of money will pay a minimum tax of 15%. Multinational corporations. So let me ask you, do you think that those companies are simply going to say, oh, gee, you know what? Sure, no problem. We'll take a bite out of our apple by the tune of 15% and just hand it over? No way. What are they going to do? They're going to pass down those costs, that loss of revenue, profit, and cash on hand to the end consumer. You and I are the ones who will ultimately absorb that tax. One of the reasons the previous administration focused on cutting corporate taxes is not merely for the cutting of corporate taxes, but for the downstream effect in a positive way that has on the end consumer. If corporations can keep more money, that means that they can pay higher wages. That means they can keep jobs local. That means they can keep prices down. Now, not all corporations do that. However, it gives them the ability to do it. It makes the American marketplace competitive. Well, taxing corporations, they will ultimately look elsewhere to lower costs and pass those costs down to consumers. It is a pattern of factual history. Problem number one. Problem number two in the American Inflation Reduction Act is the IRS enforcement. So there was roughly $50 billion dedicated right away to the IRS. About $4 billion of that goes towards advancement in technology. Right now, the IRS operates on about 1980, 1982, 1984 technology. So technology created in the early 80s is what the IRS currently uses 30, 35 years later. But yet, only 10% of those funds are going to enhance that kind of technology. Where's the other 45 billion going? It's going to go buy more hall monitors or more IRS enforcement agents. $45 billion is dedicated to go finding more IRS agents to pick fights with American taxpayers. And make no mistake about it, that is the adversarial language and position of IRS enforcement agents. And that's not the agency as a whole, but that is a directive and a mandate. And if you think that the IRS can't or won't be adversarial or simply will acknowledge that you are a legitimate taxpayer, like most taxpayers are, you are sadly mistaken. The previous head of the IRS, Lois Lerner, under the Obama administration, targeted certain individuals and groups. We are seeing the IRS being weaponized. And lest you be confused, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, they are not the ones that will pay more taxes. In fact, the Budgetary Office has come out and said they believe approximately $20 billion in revenue will be created for those making less than $400,000. Now, we should know by now that congressional candidates, politicians, presidents, they lie. They don't tell the truth. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. George Bush, number one, got in front of the Republican National Convention in the late 80s and said, read my lips, no new taxes. And because of the war overseas, he had to raise taxes. He likely lost the '92 election to Bill Clinton because of that. President Biden looked multiple times at the American people on stump speeches, on presidential stages, and said, anyone making less than $400,000 a year will not pay 1 penny more in taxes under my presidency. It's simply not true. In fact, the target of the IRS enforcement will be for those likely making between $75,000 and $250,000 a year. Now, just because you file your taxes on time, you keep good records, and you're an honest taxpayer, like most people are, that doesn't keep you from an audit, from getting a fight picked with you. And the IRS works this way. They accuse you of something, you're guilty until proven innocent, it costs you time, money, energy, and effort, and then you have no recourse. So we are watching very closely the rollout of the IRS enforcement funds and what that looks like for you, for me, and for every other taxpayer. Now, if there's one shining star in the American Inflation Reduction Act, it's the commitment, or rather the tax benefits, of solar credits, electric vehicles, and the use of alternative energy. The administration doubled down again, offering some of the most lucrative energy credits for solar, wind, alternative that we've seen. And so this, for many of you, may end up being a tax planning strategy with your CPA, tax attorney, with us here. But that is something that is extended from the previous solar tax credits. And that's for both businesses, individuals, car manufacturers, etc. It really opens up a lot of avenues to utilize this as both an alternative energy source, but also as a planning strategy. We'll have more of these conversations as we enter into our end-of-year tax planning meetings and have conversations with you, your CPA, your tax attorney, your team. But to sum up, the American Inflation Reduction Act does nothing to reduce inflation and actually does many things to target the average American taxpayer. More information, more understanding, and more strategies on how to mitigate and manage those impacts will come as we understand more about the bill. But for now, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.